1. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another great episode of the Jason Howell Company Speaker Series Zoominars. My name is Jason Howell. Today's topic, international estate planning for future expats. There's been a lot of conversation recently, I wonder why, about moving out of the country and what that might be like. But what if you already have someone that you are married to that's outside of the country, or someone that's coming here? There's so many permutations of the expat life. What if you're overseas temporarily and something should happen? This is why we do planning in our business, and many estate planners, well, that's all they do too. So to answer that question, we've got a great estate planner here for you, Mr. Scott Schweitzer, president of Prime Estate Planning. He's got a unique perspective, in fact, a unique perspective on a lot of things. And I think he's going to be able to answer a lot of these questions around international estate planning that so many people have. But before we get to Scott and pepper him with a bunch of questions, let's just meet him. Scott, welcome to the Zoominar. How has your day been so far?
Jason, I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me. It's been a great day. Getting prepped up actually to go to the Kennedy Center. For those of you who are in the DC area, you know that fine
Very
art
nice.
place. I've got an opera that I'm going to tonight, and meeting with a bunch of friends to do that. So doing some business, meeting some clients, and planning out some fun things this evening.
See, I told people that you have a unique perspective, a unique entertainment lifestyle. You must tell us, what is the opera?
So the opera is going to be Verdi's Macbeth. So it's actually one that's not a typical one and so forth, but we'll see how the Washington National Opera does, and regardless, it'll be a fun evening.
Well, I look forward to your review.
Okay, thank you.
Well, let's do this. I'm going to share my screen, and we'll get to our presentation, and that way you can get to prepping for the opera. I mean, heck, what are you doing here? Once again, if you're excited about hearing international estate planning ideas for expats or future expats, then you've come to the right Zoominar. Scott, once again, thank you for being here and being a part of what we're doing educationally today. Before we get to all of the Q&A, let's just have a word from our sponsor. And our sponsor, of course, is the Jason Howell Company. Jason Howell Company is a family wealth management firm specializing in sustainable investing and family governance. We're able to compete with some of the most well-known private bank and wealth advisors by forming a virtual family office, a team of experts and specialists, experts like Scott, which is why we're so glad he's here. We're based in Northern Virginia, but we have clients all around the country. Not quite all around the world yet, but all around the country. For more about our firm, Jason Howell Company, just go to jasonhowell.com. And with that, we'll get to Scott. So Scott, I don't think you've been an estate planner your entire life. I think you've got a lot of things that are just unique about your professional life, personal life. Tell us, how did you get into estate planning?
Jason, thank you for asking the question. Yeah, no, I'm from Wisconsin originally, and I went to school at University of Chicago right after high school, and then came out to Washington D.C. Ended up going to Georgetown Law School, and when I first started practicing, I was in a real estate practice. I was part of a law firm. We did real estate law, and then I opened up my own title company. So I had a lot of real estate investors as clients and so forth. And it really wasn't until 2017, when I had two sets of people in my family pass away, that I was really inspired to move into estate planning full time. The one set was my grandparents on my mom's side, and the other was my great aunt and uncle. And they had very different experiences with estate planning. And I saw really the difference between a well-executed, well-thought-out, and well-communicated plan and total lack of planning, unfortunately, on the other side.
Well, and so, yeah, it was a personal family experience that pushed you into this area. Interesting.
Exactly.
Tell me about that delta between the two estates as they were. I mean, everyone's got an estate, whether it's pre-planned or not, is up in the air.
Well, for example, luckily for me on my mom's side, my grandparents back in Wisconsin went to work with an estate planning professional, and they created what's called a revocable living trust. And they put their assets into that trust. And they let my mom and her brother know what was going on. And so they knew what to expect. So when they did pass away, my mom and her brother went back into the estate planning attorney's office, and the entire estate was administered in about 3 months. No probate court, so no court process at all. It was pretty easy. It allowed them to focus on the family. And actually, because it was so collaborative, it brought the two sides of the family closer together, which was really, I think, a blessing. Unfortunately, on the other side, with a great aunt and uncle, they had a different mindset. They didn't feel comfortable talking about money or death with their family, and I guess their perspective was that they would just let the kids pick up the pieces when they passed away. So they didn't create a trust, they didn't create a will, they really didn't do anything, and so their estate went through what's called intestate succession. So it's whatever Wisconsin's plan is for the estate, and unfortunately, their kids didn't agree with that. So they all lawyered up, got their own attorneys, and they fought it out in court for about 3 years. And the sad thing is, at the end of that 3 year period, the value of the estate just about equaled the cost of all the litigations and
Oh
so.
boy. Oh,
So
okay.
nobody got anything. And there are people on that side of the family to this day that who are still not speaking to each other. And, you know, if their parents, I think if their parents would have seen that as an outcome, they would have gotten over their procrastination or fear and done something, to
Well,
put it in place.
yeah,
So
3 months versus 3 years. Family that grew closer together versus family that grew apart.
right.
What a difference. Scott, I know you've seen this, when we're working with clients, especially clients who have resources that will be left over, so they have extra. A
Yeah.
lot of times the conversation is around family preservation over just wealth preservation. Is that something that you see as well?
It is, and I think that's super important, And then I think just one point about that clients will often ask me, especially if they feel uncomfortable about one of the choices they're making. Perhaps they're not leaving everything equally to each kid, or perhaps they're leaving assets to charity, and they ask me, what's the best way to handle this to make sure that people aren't going to fight? And my advice almost always is to let your beneficiaries, your kids, whoever else, know what your plan is while you're alive. So if they're going to fight about it, they're going to fight with you, and they can confront you while you're still alive, so that there's no surprises when they pass away. It's not going to be conflict among the family. It's going to be direct conflict with you. And after all, it's your money, so you get to make those choices.
Know what your plan is while you're alive. Great advice.
Yeah.
Now, you not only have done this estate planning thing since what, 2017,
Right.
but you mentioned there was also a settlement company that you were a part of. So you had this interrelation between real estate and estate planning. What happened to that?
So my first focus was real estate law and working in the title company and so forth. And there was a great amount of cross business back and forth. I have a lot of real estate investors in particular who I could educate them. I can only not only help them with their transactions, but I could help educate them on how to own their properties better for legacy planning purposes. You might know that for real estate investors, they're particularly at risk, especially if they have properties in different U.S. states. Let's say you have properties in a variety of states. If you do nothing and just own those properties in your own personal name, or even in an LLC without any estate planning, and you pass away, those properties will have to go through separate probate proceedings. So your heirs, your family are going to have to open up separate court proceedings in every state where the
Wow.
properties are located. So
Yeah.
I really try to help real estate investors clean things up and get things organized. And, it was wonderful having the title company and the estate planning business firm, but it just became clear that my passion was really in working with the families, working with the investors, the business owners in the capacity of legacy planning. And so I got to the point where we had enough business coming in from the firm, and I decided to double down with that and let the title work go. And I refer business out to a couple of my trusted partners right now for title work.
Yeah, I bet you have a real good cadre of title folks, and you still
Yeah.
get to be the expert in the room when it comes to real estate for estate planning, right?
Yes, exactly.
That's great.
Exactly.
Before we switch over to the prepared Q&A, tell us a little bit about Georgetown Law and your experience.
Well, it's interesting because I took 3 years off in between college and law school. And in retrospect, 3 years doesn't really feel like a lot, but it felt like a lot in my 20s.
Yeah.
And when I decided to go to law school, I was working full time at an investment bank, Friedman Billings Ramsey, FBR, in
Yeah.
Ireland. And it was the encouragement of my boss, the chief administrative officer there, who had gone to Georgetown law school at nighttime while she was working full time as a management consultant. So I decided to do the same thing there. I went to Georgetown for 4 years in law school while working at the investment bank. And then, if you recall, that was back in the 2006, 2007, 2008. And
Oh,
suddenly there
wow.
was a business for the investment bank. Year three, I was no longer at the investment bank, and I got
Oh,
clerking at a law office as someone who focused on real estate. So that pivot also introduced me to real estate law. So that was sort of the how I got exposed to real estate law. And yeah, it was busy working full time, and then also going to the evening program. You know what I mean? And maintaining a gym schedule, working out and so forth, and dating and everything. But I was in my
Yeah.
20s, and those 4 years just seemed to fly by. So no regrets there.
Wow. The you've got a story for the Great Recession of 2008.
Exactly.
How fun. You know what? Let's talk more about that the next time we have
Sure.
coffee.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, let's go ahead and get to our prepared Q&A here. International expat estate Q&A. Let's do something to level set a little bit here in the first question, which is just answer the question, what is an expat?
Sure. Well, an expat, it's a wide variety of people. It's pretty inclusive. It can be anything from your traditional US, Canadian, European citizen resident who wants to retire in a different country. It can also be what we call right now digital nomads, people who or perhaps are based in the US, but then they go and travel and they work with an online job, or they maintain their job in the US, but they work virtually. It also includes people who are slow traveling. So people who are, let's say, US residents, but they spend maybe 3 months in each country, and they slowly but surely move around from country to country to country. I think all those people fall under that. I also like to think, in the context of international estate planning, you also have, people who they're not sure where they're going to want to live. They may have plans to retire someone else, but they also may pop back a little bit. So it's a pretty inclusive group of people. It includes those who have jobs that station them, like the World Bank, IMF, U.S. government, who station them abroad as well.
Wow. Yeah, there are people like that, I think, in all of our circles, especially when you live and work in the DC area.
Yes, exactly.
So when we think about other countries in the world, 200 plus other countries in the United States,
Yeah.
are there estate planning laws similar to ours?
If were part of the British Commonwealth originally, then you have a chance there are some similar laws, because that's the way it tended to evolve. You look at colonies, you've got Great Britain, you've got a lot that were France, and France had a system that was based off the French code. So that's very different. But so the answer is it depends. But what you find a lot also is that in the US, you've got a lot of choices. You can choose to leave everything to your kids in equal measures. You can choose to disinherit them completely. You can choose potentially to disinherit your spouse. You've got a lot of choices. You can give things to charity, friends, whatever you want to do. In a lot of countries, you don't have that choice. You need to leave things as a matter of law to your kids, or you need to leave a certain percentage to your kids before you can give to other people or other entities. So that's
Interesting.
one of the biggest things that people find surprising, is they don't have as much in the way of choice, and a lot of that comes down to just those countries' desire to maintain traditional family values and make sure that if you do well, that your kids are provided for by the family money and not by the state itself.
So if you're an American citizen and you're living in another country, a non British colonized country,
Right.
are you under the laws of that country, and if you die there, or are you under the laws of the United States?
Well, it really depends. And that it comes down to, let's imagine that, let's take a scenario right now where you're a US citizen. And let's say, for example, that you just have a vacation house. And let's say somewhere in Latin America. I go to Colombia, South America a lot. So we'll put them in Colombia right now.
Okay.
And they've got a vacation house there. And but you reside in the US. And the in the US law, it's really called, where are you domiciled? There's this term called domicile. And
Domiciled.
it's pretty complex. Yeah, it gets pretty complex. And I won't go into all the details, but there's a whole, like a 12-part moving test to see where you're domiciled. Basically, it's like, where do you call home? You know what I mean? It's where you domiciled when you die. So let's assume you're domiciled in the US, but you vacation in Colombia 3 months out of the year. And let's say that you own your vacation home. What's probably going to happen is that your vacation home will pass through whatever Colombia's laws would be, inheritance laws and so forth,
Mm.
whereas the rest of your estate in the US is going to be governed by US law. So what I recommend there is that you really need to understand what the law is in both of those countries. And most likely, you're going to want to work with a professional who can bridge that gap, who can make sure that the planning that you're doing in both countries covers all your assets and it also meshes together. It's integrated rather than having contradictory planning, which can be expensive and can cause just a lot of issues. And you can also cause assets going to the people who you didn't want them to go to.
That's right. So domicile, that's one thing to consider. What
Yes.
else would an expat need to consider when planning their estate potentially outside of the United States of America?
Sure. Well, for example, if you're planning on retiring overseas, and this happens sometimes in European countries, and you're going to be domiciled in that country, then that's actually kind of the nexus where all the estate planning happens. So let's say you move to France and you intend to stay there for all intents and purposes, or you pass away after being there for several years and you haven't been back in the US that much. Sometimes in those cases, if you have estate planning back in the US to deal with your US assets, it can conflict with, let's just say, French law. So, for example, this is kind of a quick example. If you've got a revocable living trust in the US and it's holding your US residence and it's holding your US bank accounts and stocks and bonds and so forth, that's typically recommended in the US. But France is going to look at that revocable living trust and they're not going to realize that it's a pass-through entity and they're not going to just treat it as a benign trust. They're going to treat it as almost like a separate business. And any income coming out of that trust is going to be taxed at a way higher tax rate. So all that to say, there are some unintended consequences that can come into play if you are an expat who resides abroad and you have U.S. estate planning and you don't take into consideration what the laws are of the other country and how they're going to view the estate planning and the assets that you have in the U.S. And just one other point, of course, there are tax treaties between the U.S. and many other countries. And so there can be a lot of implications. You actually really have to get down to the details of the tax treaty as well.
Yeah, so for all those people who are considering moving overseas, talking to your estate planner might be pretty important.
Yeah.
Maybe your CPA, tax treaties.
Yeah, absolutely. And most people, myself included, at least the first, you're not thinking about estate planning when you're becoming an expat because you're excited, right? You're going to this new country, you're on an adventure, you have a vacation home, you're going someplace else. You're not really thinking about death and so forth. You may think about income taxes right away because you may have to grapple with that in the first year that you're there. But most people go into becoming an expat not thinking about death and legacy planning, but thinking about having a good time. So I encourage people to have a good time. I think that's what it's all about. But I think it's important to realize there just are a few areas that you're at greater risk, and you want to work with somebody who is aware of that and also has connections with attorneys in the countries that you're going to be living with, so you can come up with a comprehensive plan.
Well, let's talk about that. The idea of having someone who has expertise, who's familiar with the realities of living and being domiciled. I'm using your terminologies
Sure.
now,
Yes.
in another country. I read your website, and one of the things that I truly appreciated as sort of copy editing, if we can call it that,
Sure.
is this block of text where you spoke to this is what's going to happen if you go to a traditional estate attorney. You're going to get the document done eventually, and you're going to put it on a shelf, and you're not going to maybe put everything into the trust necessarily. You're expecting that you're going to get a reminder when laws update from the estate attorney that they would change things automatically. You move, you put it at the bottom of a box, you forget about it.
Yeah.
And you allude to how the way that you and your team work, that doesn't happen. And I think that has something to do with this family business lawyer. So can you tell us a little bit about the family business lawyer approach that keeps things updated?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Well, really, what it comes down to is we have what we call a relational type practice with our clients, as opposed to a transactional type practice. So it's a choice of business model. Transactional would be like, hey, I'm going to see a client, I'm going to have a 2 meeting process, a consultation, a signing meeting, and then that matter is basically over. They can reach out to us to re-engage us for changes, but that transaction is done. As opposed to having a relationship more like a financial planner might have, like you would understand with your clients.
Yeah.
Where you are in contact with your clients and you're always, making sure that the plan they have in place are going to work for those that, they care about the most when they need it. So just to give you an example, to start with, we'll have a 3 meeting process. We'll have a consultation. I call it a family wealth planning session. It's a workshop and so forth. It's a 2-hour workshop. We'll have a signing meeting, which incidentally can be in person or it can be electronic. We also do a lot of remote online notarization and witnessing. That's new law, and a lot of our expats really appreciate that. But then we have a follow-up meeting. We inventory our clients' assets, which I'm sure you can relate to. You do the same thing probably for your clients. And then we have a detailed conversation about how either the clients can go ahead and fund their trust appropriately, and we check in with them and make sure they get that done, or they can hire us to do it. It's more of a turnkey experience. They can hire us to actually move their assets into the trust as appropriate on their behalf. And that's really a big part of the deal. I mean, you would be surprised how many clients I get who have created trust, let's say a decade ago, and we go to do a review and we find out that actually the items, the assets that should be in their trust are actually still in their personal names. And it comes back to accountability or lack of accountability, because let's face it, it's not easy. It's not fun to have to retitle all your assets or to make beneficiary changes and things like that. So you really need somebody who's going to keep you accountable. So that's one way in the beginning that we have a relational approach. And then at a minimum for all of our clients, we have a 3-year check-in. That's a complimentary check-in to see if their asset situation, their family situation, or the law has changed in a way that means that we should update things. And then for some of my clients who have, own family businesses, who have more complicated situations, we're on an annual membership plan. So we can tweak things at the end of the year for tax purposes, for other types of planning purposes, or business purposes, et cetera. So we have less in the way of clients. We have a really deep relationship with them.
Let's see. We'll talk a little bit about that because that sounds unique. An annual membership plan when there's a little complexity. And for some people, I mean, normal life can be complex. And so
Yeah.
maybe some people would choose the annual membership plan. Talk about the business model there. Is it the same sort of 5 to 10K up front and then something nominal later, or is it maybe less upfront and something more annualized?
What it would be is that you'd have the same cost of just doing the actual foundational planning. But when you do advanced estate planning, a lot of times there is going to be family meetings where you have to bring in kids and other people into the meetings. And so we handle those. There may be disclosures to the IRS or other parties that have to be made on an annual basis. If you have an irrevocable trust, for example, for estate tax purposes, there are things called crummy letters that have to go out. It's an odd word, but they have to go out to potential beneficiaries. So the things like that, we could charge a la carte. But if clients actually choose our membership programs, they pay us on an annual or a monthly basis. And we give them discounted rates, and we give them just a streamlined process so that they don't have to, they don't forget to do these things. They don't forget to have a meeting with us and with their CPA to make sure we're maximizing or making their taxes more efficient each year. So there's a variety of benefits. There's different tiers and so forth, but it's really built upon making it efficient and making it just a natural, we're part of these people's natural team, their financial planner, their wealth advisor, their CPA, could be other few people that are part of this. We become part of their team and we all collaborate together. And I think it's fun. I love getting to know their entire team, the entire family, and it just becomes a great experience.
And is that a situation where those annualized folks, where you're reaching out to them? Because as you mentioned on your site, people get kind of busy in their regular lives.
Yes. Yeah. We
Okay.
reach out to them, whether it's annual or just our every 3-year check-in and so forth. Of course, it's optional. They can choose not to meet with us, but we remind them because you're right. People get super busy. People forget about it. And sometimes they forget about the reasons why they need to check in with us. So we make a point of reaching out to them. And and that's one of the big benefits as well.
But we appreciate on our side this idea of the team advisor approach because you have an expertise that I don't have, and likely vice versa. And then there are other people, the CPAs and the mortgage persons, though you might have a little leg up on them. When it comes to working with advisors, do you kind of do that same kind of thing? Because many times families will have a whole cadre of folks, and so do you get to know that team of advisors as well?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, if working with financial planners or wealth advisors, it's really important to know how people's goals are shifting, how their portfolio is shifting, where their net worth is and so forth, because we want to make sure the plan that we put in place, in the years past is still meshing with the reality that they have. And it also becomes a really nice collegial group of professionals that are working together. And I find that we a lot of times have a lot of shared values. And so that's part of the fun part for me is I get to learn more about the financial planning world. I get to educate my team more about the estate planning world. Same thing with the CPA. So you really become, it's almost like you're working in a larger community of professionals where you're learning a little bit about the subject matter that touches upon things where you're not the pure expert. And it's great.
Yeah, the virtual family office approach, like we had
Exactly.
mentioned
Yeah.
earlier. Well, getting back to this international situations that people may be considering or may face, how can the family members, and so maybe these are adult children who would be beneficiaries, would be administrators, would be trustees, what should they be doing with their parents, let's say today, if said parents, the patriarch, the matriarchs, are in, Colombia, for
Yeah.
example, living and hanging out with you when you visit? How should they be preparing just in case something happens and they have to act?
Well, part of it is just communicating with their parents and making sure that the parents are okay with sharing information about death and money and planning and so forth. And that can be tricky at first. So sometimes it's kind of funny. Sometimes people will have to do their own estate plan first and share that with their parents before the parents are willing to open up and be receptive to advice from the kids. It's interesting how that works sometimes. But once you get beyond that, it really comes down to what the parent situation is. Number one, are they a U.S. Are they domiciled in the U.S., U.S. citizen, simply with a vacation home somewhere else? If that's the case, they probably just need to create a will in that country. Let's say they got a vacation home in Colombia. You probably need to create a will with the appropriate person there that details what happens to that asset. They can't rely upon their U.S. planning alone, and they likely either can't or don't want to put that asset into, for example, a U.S. based trust. So that's number one. Just getting the parents introduced to the right professionals in both countries, or a professional that can link the gap. Number two would be parents who are expats that are living in that other country. And in that situation, you want to kind of take a look at, the family dynamics as well. Are we in a situation where both parents are U.S. citizens? If yes, then of course you probably know this, but their income, the worldwide income, is going to be taxed in the U.S. regardless of where they live. But for estate planning purposes, let's assume that we have one parent who is a U.S. citizen, the other one isn't. How does that affect us? It affects us specifically when it comes to estate taxes, federal estate taxes. Without getting into the weeds too much, if you're married, you get an unlimited marital deduction, which means you have two estate tax coupons. So it doubles the amount of net worth you could have before you have to deal with taxation. However, if one of you is not a U.S. citizen, you actually lose one of those coupons. So people who otherwise wouldn't have to worry about federal estate taxes suddenly have to worry about it. So you can, with open communications to your parents, you can figure out whether they're in a situation like that. I had clients who came up who they're in their 40s, but they moved here from El Salvador, back in the 80s, and they opened up a construction business, and the worth is about $20 million right now. So, what a great rags to riches story.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, but the wife is not a U.S. citizen, so they realized that they were at risk currently to have a couple $1 million in estate taxes and potentially more if they kept growing. So what we did is create what's called a qualified domestic trust, or a QDOT, which, without getting into the weeds, creates a way by you're not going to have to deal with that lower estate tax issue. So there's ways to kind of work around that and so forth. So another example might be people who actually are not U.S. citizens and they're not U.S. residents. I'm not sure how many people out here actually live and are citizens of a different country, but let's say, for example, you live in Europe and you're a citizen of Europe, but you want to buy real estate in the U.S. or you want to buy a business in the U.S. Great. A lot of people like to invest in the U.S. The economy is doing well. It can be fantastic as a way to get money out of countries where there's political instability. You get into some place like the U.S. where you don't have as much instability, despite current election things and so
Right,
forth.
despite all that.
Still, the market is considered to be more stable than many of these countries.
Yes.
One of the big concerns, there are a variety of concerns, is if you own something in your individual name and you are a non-U.S. citizen, you're from, let's say, Japan or Europe, and you pass away while still owning that asset, the estate tax exclusion for you is only $60,000. So I'll repeat that really
Wow.
quickly.
60.
Yeah. So for a married couple in the who are U.S. residents, U.S. citizens, it's about $24 million. So $24 million, $60,000. Big difference. If
Huge.
you own a business or you own real estate in the U.S. and it's likely going to be worth more than $60,000. So if let's say you own $1 million piece of real estate, virtually the entire thing would be taxed at a federal level of 40%. So suddenly your investment has become a huge bust. And before buying that investment, before buying that piece of real estate, there are things that we can do to get it owned in the appropriate way, in the right sort of entity, so that doesn't happen.
It
But
raised that limit from 60K to something higher.
way higher, much higher, many millions. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's
Big
exciting. Let's get the international folks in to buy some real estate out here.
Yes.
Well, our time's coming short, so I would just love to hear your perspective on how you see estate planning maybe changing today, but more importantly in the future. Since when we're talking about planning, we're talking about the future. Do you see the world becoming more like, I guess, the old school Great Britain, the United States, or finding its own path and something we have to adapt to?
I think the world's going to find its own path. I do think that you have enough countries out there that are not interested in following the US's way or Great Britain's way, that you're going to have a lot of variety out there.
Okay.
I think that even if you have countries that eventually are going to adapt and give their citizens more choice, or the residents more choice in who they leave their estate to, this area of law is very slow to change. It's it's not going to change very quickly. What I do see is more and more people becoming expats, becoming digital nomads, moving abroad, but having a variety of different locations that they're in.
Too.
So I think that the need then is to have a comprehensive, coordinated plan. Is to first kind of raise that awareness that there is an issue here, there is a need, there are some risks, and then just linking up with the right people who can address those, and people who are specialists in the laws in the different countries where you're going to be hanging out and owning assets and living, so they can stay on top of what you need to do. So I think it's really more about making that shift as somebody who wants to live in different countries internally in terms of your own planning, rather than waiting for the laws to catch up everywhere.
Wow, that makes a lot of sense. A comprehensive, coordinated plan. Well, embrace yourself. I'm going to stop the share. This has been educational and interesting, and only gosh, I'm sure the tip of the spear of the information, because like I said, we have 200 plus countries outside of this country.
Right.
So lot to learn. Before we disconnect for this presentation, Scott, I think I heard it a couple of times, but I'm going to let you say it. What's the first thing that anyone considering being an expat, or someone who is an expat now, should do, think, have when it comes to their estate plan?
Just make sure you have a trusted advisor who's familiar with the law in both countries, who's aware of international estate planning, and let them know what your plans are. Ideally, before you purchase any major assets in foreign countries. That's what I would say.
Okay, that makes sense. Scott Schweitzer, President, Prime Estate Planning. I am so glad you were here to educate us today. Enjoy the opera, enjoy Macbeth, enjoy Colombia when you get there next. And we look forward to having a coffee with you or something pretty soon.
Thank you, Jason. I appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.
Bye for now.